Hello and welcome to Restoration DIY. In this episode, I'll be turning a bowl from a section of an ash log cast into 3-colour epoxy resin. It's a good one to try if you're just starting to do epoxy resin projects, so let's get into it. After cutting the ash log down the centre on the bandsaw, I marked out and drilled an 8mm hole. This is for the locating pin on my circle cutting jig. I used the jig on my bandsaw to cut the timber blank to fit into the casting bucket. If I changed the bandsaw blade to a 6mm wide one, I would just cut into the blank to align with the centre point, then simply rotate it to cut a circle, but I had some other projects to cut after this one that required the wider blade, so in this case I just cut straight lines to remove the bulk of the waste, then rotated the blank through the blade to knock the corners off. So with the blank cut to size I could begin casting, but first I waxed the inside of the bucket to aid in releasing the epoxy resin after it had cured. One quick note about my workspace, it's a bit cluttered. This is due to some localised flooding, so I cannot store anything on my garage floor. I hope this will be remedied soon, but until then, I'm just going to have to make do. The chosen colours for this project are purple, green and orange. They seem to go together, and I was confident that if I pre-cured the resin in their individual batches, I would get good separation, and not just a yucky mess. As with all my other resin projects, this is a 2-part epoxy resin mixed as a 2:1 ratio, and I try to get as close as I can to that mix. I poured 150 grams of part B into each of the 3 mixing cups, then I added 300 grams of part A as I mixed each one, adding the mica colorant halfway through mixing each for 4 minutes. After hot melt gluing a block to the blank to act as a level base so I could add some weight, I poured the epoxy resin into the casting. This resin stood for about 20 minutes before I added it, and it was getting comfortably warm to the touch. The amount of time you leave it will depend on a lot of things, so as I have done, you will have to experiment to get it right. Not long enough and the resin will convect as it heats up and it will mix into that yucky mess. Leave it too long and well, I think you can work that one out. And with the 3 colours added into the bucket, it was time to put it in the pressure pot. I added the usual 50 to 55 psi and I left it overnight to cure. Now I've made a slight mistake here. All will be revealed in a moment. It's been 24 hours and the blank has had plenty of time to cure. But as soon as I removed the lid, I saw a problem. In my haste to get the casting into the pressure pot, I had forgotten an important step. Although I had a small amount of weight on the blank, it was not enough, and the timber blank had floated up in the resin. This is the first time this has happened to me, and I was fairly annoyed with myself. A simple mistake, but it is what it is. I could have added more resin to cover the blank, but that would have taken another day to cure, and I didn't have time. So I decided to go ahead and use it as it is. After marking the centre and drilling a hole for the woodworm screw, I fixed the blank to the lathe using the tailstock for added support. With the blank safely fixed to the lathe, I could begin turning. As ever, the Easy Wood Tools full-size finisher kicked off proceedings. Because the timber blank had moved off centre, there was a lot of vibration when I tried to turn the speed up, so slowly at first I had to get it to round and balanced. My new lathe has much more power than my old one, and I was soon able to turn away the excess material off the blank. I decided quite early on that this would be a pedestal bowl, as it still had a lot of height. So the next job was to form the cutout. Unfortunately I lost about 10 minutes of footage prior to this, but I began with a 3/8 bowl gouge, removing material, getting down to the desired depth. cutout roughly formed, I went back to the carbide cutter to shape the side of the bowl, stopping frequently to check my progress. There was still some resin around the top section, which I wanted to remove. This forced a nice design feature in that it made the side taper inwards, which I quite liked. I kept working away, switching between the carbide cutter and the bowl gouge. The gouge was a tool of choice for forming the cutout. I recently reground it to be more swept back, which has made a big difference in the tighter areas. Once I was happy with the basic shape, I spent a bit of time fine-tuning the surface. The base looked a bit on the thick side, but rather than taking material off the upper part, I just removed the excess from the underside. This kept the overall shape better proportioned. With the outside of the bowl to shape, I moved on to the base, using a 3/8 bowl gouge to remove the excess thickness. To form the mortise, I used a thin parting tool to define the outer edge, then the bowl gouge to remove the inner waste material, followed by the dovetail cutter to form the dovetail. With a bit more tidying up from the skew chisel and the negative rate scraper, the base was done and ready for sanding. I sanded the base and the outside of the bowl from 80 to 3000 grit. Then I turned the bowl around and began hollowing out the inside. In a change to my usual finishing process, I applied finish to just the base, and I'll do the rest of the bowl inside and out in one go at the end. The top section of this bowl was mainly wood, so the 3/8 bowl gouge had no problem cutting away the waste material, and this ash was a dream to work with, especially since I reground my gouge. In the next few clips, you can see me removing material, mainly from the outer part, from the rim down towards the base. This helps to keep the weight towards the centre, and I have found it makes for a better balanced workpiece. Stopping every now and then, I could see some fairly deep chipping in the rim, which I would deal with later. So bearing that in mind, I continued thinning out the bowl, working my way down to the desired depth. The wall thickness I was aiming for was on the thin side of 10mm or 3/8 of an inch. With the inside of the bowl roughly to shape, I could concentrate on removing the chipping in the rim. For this, I used the full-size carbide finisher. This is fitted with a negative rate cutter, which is less likely to chip the resin, and it helps with the final surface prep before sanding. I'd already sanded the outside, but I wasn't thrilled with the shape, so I set to with the carbide cutters and bowl gouge, refining the outer surface, blending and fairing the curves, until I was happy with the way it looked. So with the final shape of the bowl done, I sanded from 80 to 3000 grit. Then I cleaned down with denatured alcohol, followed by a good application of sanding sealer, which I de-nibbed with a non-abrasive Scotch pad. Then I applied a good coating of Yorkshire grit, which was thoroughly cleaned away with clean paper towel. Then the first of the two Merkur products, beginning with Polar Shine 10, also thoroughly cleaned away before applying a single coat of Polar Shine 5, which is polished off to leave the resin with a deep shine. And last but not least, Hampshire Sheen Gloss Finishing Wax, 2 coats, buffed away to polish and seal the surface. And there we go, another project finished. From the initial disappointment of the casting, I think this one has turned out very nice, and you can really see the 3 different colours in the resin. So overall, I'm happy with it, and I hope you enjoyed this episode as well, and I'd like to thank you for watching. If I could ask you to smash that like button, subscribe, and ding that bell to get notified when I release a new video, and comments are always welcome. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye for now.